Welcome, welcome to Second Saturday Conversation. Here we explore Christianity in and for the 21st century. We do it here at a bit of a slant. We don't really parse out doctrine and dogma, but because of doctrine and dogma, we have a lot to talk about. Most of us here on Second Saturday still have a sense that the heart of Christianity is worth listening to, if we can still hear it. And we do. Today, I'm going to provide a recap of our program year. Our program year is from September to June. We take July and August off. And today will be our last gathering of Second Saturday Conversation until September. We'll start a new program year on September 13th. Today, I want to remind us of some topics that we explored during the year, give you some highlights as I see them. And I'm particularly interested today to hear from you and what has struck you from our conversations. What are your takeaways or your puzzlements or perhaps newfound interests, or perhaps you've experienced that our conversations have really been affirming for you this year and have affirmed your own sense about your own thoughts, beliefs, wonder, sense of wonder. So I look forward to hearing from you, and we will do that at plenary time. Whatever our relationship is with Christianity, all of us here on Second Saturday care about the world and its future, the future of the world, and a future that will not be ours. We encourage one another to not lose heart, to care, to risk love and hope, and as the Dalai Lama says, to never give up. And as Jack Caputo reminds us, and this may be a bit of a paraphrase, but Jack suggests that the future will not be saved by divine intervention, but by imaginative invention. The future will not be saved by divine intervention, but by imaginative invention. And that's up to us. So before I get underway, Jeff, would you orient us to the plenary time and sort of how to raise your hand and all of that? Good morning, Jeff.
Sure. Good morning, Marianne. Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks.
Good morning, everybody who's here. It's great to see so many people. Summer is upon us, and so for you to show up for an hour and a half on a Saturday morning, good on you.
Well, and I will say that today is June 14th.
Yes.
If I may note that it is, among other things, No King's Day. And my hope is that a lot of our Second Saturday folks are out there with one another, standing in hope and confidence for our future.
Absolutely. Thanks, Marianne. So when the plenary comes and you will have an opportunity to interact with Marianne, I would just ask that you go down to the bottom of your little menu bar in Zoom and find the React button. It's a little heart. And if you click on the arrow to the right of that heart, you'll see several choices, one of them being to raise your hand. So raise your hand, and you can then let me know that you'd like to speak, and I'll call on people as I see hands coming up. They don't always go up on my screen in the order they do on yours, so be patient. We often have people who we don't get to during the plenary, but they often are able to stay with us until the coffee time, and then we are able to get to those folks. So hopefully we'll be able to give you an opportunity to share your input, which we're really especially looking forward to today. if you can keep your comments to 2 minutes, that will allow more people to have their voices heard and enrich our conversation. So if the 2 minutes, if you're approaching 2 minutes and we go over that, I'll just put up a finger like this as a way of gently reminding you that it's time to wrap up what you have to say. And one way that you can keep it to 2 minutes is to really compose what you'd like to say before you raise that little hand icon. So that if you're like me and you think out loud, then it's easy to ramble. So I try to do my thinking internally before I raise my hand so that I can be concise. So I invite you to consider that. So thanks, Marianne.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. In September, I introduced the theme for this program year, and I did so by making up a title, Through a Glass Darkly, Numerous of Windows, Superior for Doors. And I came up with that title, borrowing from St. Paul, a phrase of St. Paul's, that we see through a glass darkly. We know only in part. And I think that that's just such a profound acknowledgement of our condition. For as much as we discover and as clever as we are about articulating our experiences on some levels, this mystery that we live in, and certainly the mystery that some of us may call God, it's beyond our full comprehension. We will always only know in part. And so to move through a glass darkly suggests our non-knowing. It's the dark glass is not about evil. It's about non-knowing, that we see only in part, that we have a limited view. Okay, so I pulled that phrase, through a glass darkly, from St. Paul, and then I added to that a phrase from a poem of Emily Dickinson's, More Numerous of Windows, Superior for Doors. That comes from a poem of hers that begins, I dwell in possibility, a fairer house than prose. This house of possibility is more numerous of windows, superior for doors than prose. Okay. So I wanted to pair those two together. The fact that we see through a glass darkly, we know only in part. But rather than our knowing only in part committing us to silence, and sometimes that's appropriate, but rather than that committing us to silence, that non-knowing can actually loosen our imagination, loosen our tongue, loosen the various ways that we express something that we're experiencing that maybe we do not know quite of, and certainly we do not know fully. But we can do that with a languaging that helps to make or create or have something emerge from our experience of non-knowing, from our limited experience. We can yet create a response to that experience, and that the way of that response is more poetic in spirit than it is as prose. Okay, so here I'm borrowing from Emily Dickinson, that the poetic, which she says, she equates poetic and possibility. I dwell in possibility, a fairer house than prose, she says. So for Emily Dickinson, poetry is full of possibility. It's explorative. It's imaginative. It's it calls on a depth of our imagining to explore. And that kind of language, that poetic language, poesis, to make, to create, to have something emerge that wasn't there before. That kind of poetic expression is more numerous of windows. It's superior for doors than prose, which tends to be more didactic. Prose tends to be more declarative. It tends to be more explanatory than descriptive. And there's a need and a place for prose. But she suggests that the poetic, that poetry is really what helps us access the imagination and more possibilities. It opens up a sense of future. So I put those two together, hoping that whatever would evolve this year, that this title would be an appropriate canopy for our conversations. And for those of you who know me a little bit, I don't always know where we're going, but I at the same time, I have a sense that, it's time to make a move. And so for me, this title, Through a Glass Darkly, we know only in part. But that non-knowing can ignite our imaginations in a poetic way that is full of possibility. It's more numerous of windows, of seeing a horizon. It's more, these are more splendid doors to walk through than assuming that we know what it all means and where it's all going. So that was my suggested title for this year. As I said, a canopy for what we might discover together. And let me add to this, let me make a comment or two about deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. You all probably know more about this than I do, but let me just make a comment about this, because for me, it also is a little bit descriptive of the difference between prose and poetry. Deductive reasoning, as you know, is it starts with a general premise. Or I might say deductive reasoning starts with some already made presuppositions, okay? And then we use those suppositions to reach specific conclusions, okay? So some call deductive reasoning a kind of top-down thinking. And I suggest that a lot of our theology is deductive, that it reflects on presuppositions that have already been made for us about what, let's say, the Christian life means. I mean, just for a really, flat comment about that, it's like that, God is the Almighty. I'm more apt to say these days that God is not sovereign, but that God is the Almighty. Jesus is his only beloved Son, and that he died for us because we're sinners, and that was the only way to breach the chasm between us and God. Well, those are actually presuppositions. They're conclusions made on some thoughts, but thoughts that were already sort of concluded, and then a lot of theology is based on what has already been established or trying to be established, okay? So some presuppositions are better than others, but deductive reasoning tends to build on what we hope are facts or rules or even the truth. And inductive reasoning is of a very different order. Inductive reasoning, or what some people call reasoning from the bottom up, relies on observations, on observing patterns or trends or arcs of movement or experiences. Inductive reasoning is based more on the unprethinkable, the unpre-thought. It's more imaginative. It's prior to set categories. It's a response to some experience. Okay. So I suggest that deductive reasoning is more like prose and is more like how most theology has been done, deductively. And inductive reasoning, I suggest, is sort of more poetic in nature, and that for my interests, that inductive reasoning points more to a theopoetics than a theologic. And so as we have been exploring faith and meaning in various ways this year, I think that we can value not only what we can articulate, but I think we can value what we cannot articulate. That faith and meaning is also inarticulate. And that we find that actually there is a value in that sense of openness, of possibility, even our lack of certainty. It calls upon us a kind of trust rather than a kind of already established assurance. It's a different kind of confidence. So so in our first session in September, I wanted to establish that title, as I said, hoping that it would be a canopy for our explorations. And part of what this title suggests to us as well is that as we move through a class darkly, which is more numerous of windows, superior of doors, this non-knowing, that it also suggests to us that the kind of language we use to talk about some things that are beyond our grasp, that cannot be captured completely, that cannot be caught, that it requires a different kind of language. And language shapes meaning. It shapes the way we talk about experiences. Language is really important. And if we use a more didactic language for something that is can only be communicated with the language of poetry, we run into some category errors, I think. So I'm curious to know how this title, which may sound a little obscure, how that has functioned for you and what you make of that title now that the year is coming to a close. Through a Glass Darkly, more numerous of windows. It's superior for doors. This condition of ours, that this non-knowing, okay? It doesn't need to commit us to silence. It can loosen us and our imaginations. Okay. Our October session, we had a guest, Brandon Scott. Brandon Scott is a wonderful scholar. He's a scholar of Paul, but particularly of parables. He's probably one of the best interpreters of parables that we have. And he's also a wonderful photographer. So he's a wonderful observer. He pays attention. And the title of the October session was Christian Nationalism. Brandon helped us to get a better understanding of what is Christian nationalism. I would say Christian nationalism is a term for white supremacy. He didn't say that directly, but that's my perspective on this. As I said, he helped us see where it comes from and why Christian nationalism is so troublesome for Christianity, because it tries to define it for our culture, and why Christian nationalism is so dangerous for America, because actually Christian nationalism is not democratic. So this was a really important session. I encourage you, if you didn't see the October 2nd Saturday, that you tune into it. You can find it on our website, and you can also find it on YouTube. There is no humility in Christian nationalism. There's no healing in it either. Brandon suggested that the critical response to Christian nationalism is the historical Jesus. The critical response to Christian nationalism is the historical Jesus. Let me also say, in terms of the language of Christian nationalism, it's certainly didactic, it's determinative, it's quite aggressive, it's harsh, and it's threatening. And I would say that the kind of language that Christian nationalism uses exposes the kind of Christianity that they. In November, we had the title for that session was Post-Election Conversation. Our second Saturday is the second Saturday of November. The election had already taken place. And we talked about what matters to us, what do we hold dear, how are we to live. We also, even in those very, very early days of the administration, felt that the administration brings a very transactional way of understanding relationships and the world. It's all transactional. And our sense of things is that the love of God is not transactional, that God is love, as love is not transaction. I read a poem on that second Saturday in November, and I'm going to read it to you again right now. It kind of spoke to us and for us in terms of some of our reactions to the election. It's by William Stafford. This poem is A Ritual to Read to Each Other. That's the title of the poem, A Ritual to Read to Each Other. If you don't know the kind of person I am, and I don't know the kind of person you are, a pattern that others made may prevail in the world. And following the wrong God home, we may miss our star. For there is many a small betrayal in the mind, a shrug that lets the fragile sequence break, sending with shouts the horrible errors of childhood storming out to play through the broken dike. It's all very imaginative, metaphorical, powerful imagery. And as elephants parade holding each other's tail, but if one wanders, the circus won't find the park. I call it cruel, and maybe the root of all cruelty, to know what occurs, but not recognize the fact. And so I appeal to a voice, to something shadowy, a remote region in all who talk. Though we could fool each other, we should consider, lest the parade of our mutual life get lost in the dark. For it is important that awake people be awake, or a breaking line may discourage them back to sleep. The signals we give, yes or no or maybe, should be clear. The darkness around us is deep. I'm going to read the poem more quickly one more time. This I read on second Saturday in November. If you don't know what kind of person I am, and I don't know the kind of person you are, a pattern that others made may prevail in the world, and following the wrong God home, we may miss our star. For there is many a small betrayal in the mind, a shrug that lets the fragile sequence break, sending with shouts the horrible errors of childhood, storming out to play through the broken dike. And as elephants parade holding each other's tail, but if one wanders, the circus won't find the park. I call it cruel, and maybe the root of all cruelty, to know what occurs, but not recognize the fact. And so I appeal to a voice, to something shadowy, a remote, important region in all who talk. Though we could fool each other, we should consider that voice. Okay. I appeal to a voice, to something shadowy, a remote region in all who talk. Though we could fool each other, we should consider, lest the parade of our mutual life get lost in the dark. For it is important that awake people be awake, or a breaking line may discourage them back to sleep. The signals we give, yes or no or maybe, should be clear. The darkness around us is deep. In December, it was the season of Advent, and I titled that session, A People Who Walk in Darkness. And as you might remember from the Isaiah passage, we are a people who walk in darkness, who have seen a great light. Advent means to come. Jack Caputo suggests that the highest desire of the human heart is to keep the future open. Isn't that an interesting comment and observation? That the highest desire of the human heart is to keep the future open. So Advent, which means to come, is it calls upon our hopes and dreams for a future. It calls upon us to keep open to our hopes and dreams and not settle for predictions that may lead us astray, as William Stafford says. We are not to fear the determinate or the indeterminate, but to structure our lives with hope and with expectation. Okay. We talked a little bit about the difference between omnipotence and omnipotentiality. This is also Jack Caputo, that God's potency lies in omnipotentiality, okay, possibility. God's potency does not lie in omnipotence. This is just stuff for us to think about. In that December session, we also talked about the power of God as a call, and that we are the response. We talked a little bit about, and again, this is imagery from Jack Caputo, that God is an icon of the unconditional. Okay, this is a non-transactional way of thinking. So what does this mean? This is more for us to unpack. Okay, this is a lot to unpack. And we just danced with this thought in December. God is an icon of unconditionality. And Jack would say that Jesus is the icon of God. So there's a nice haiku for you, or a nice koan. We also tripped along the recognition that each age, every age has its own imaginary. Every age has its own imaginative vision. Now, I know that we are now living in the digital age, but I would say that for our purposes and some of our conversations, that the imaginary of our age is less theological and more theopoetic. And again, this references prose and poetry, possibility and open-endedness, indeterminacy versus determinacy, okay? So in this session in December, we talked about the to come, and to keep the future open, and not to count on divine intervention, but on imaginative invention. And then I quoted, and I wish I could remember who it was from, but the quote, and I think it is indeed from a poet, who says, "In a dark time, the eye begins to see poetically, metaphorically, inferentially, internally, in a time, in a dark time." So in this dark time of Advent, in a time when we feel we are a people who walk in darkness, yet this is also the time when maybe we can begin to see a light that was indescribable to us before. So January, kind of moving along with that, the title for my session in January was Jesus and Epiphany of Darkness. But that plays on the fact that there is light in the darkness. It does not save us from the darkness, but that light is in the darkness. And that there is darkness in human life, but there is also a radiance that shines from within us. Okay. We talked in January a little bit about Jesus as poet and Jesus as poem. Again, these are images that I have learned to think about and ponder and wonder about because of the work of Jack Caputo. So in Jesus as poet, what we might consider is that Jesus is, as poet, expresses our depth experiences, which include love and loss and suffering and death and renewal. But Jesus speaks from, as a poet, speaks from our depth experiences of life and our depth experiences of God, not so much of belief in God, but of our depth experiences of God. In that, Jesus is a poet. And Jesus might be considered a poem in that he is, and this is figure of language, the Word made flesh. And a poem reaches the intellect by way of the heart. That's R.S. Thomas, the poet R.S. Thomas says that a poem teaches and reaches the intellect by way of the heart. So if we might play with the notion that Jesus is a poem, he reaches us by way of the heart. Now, a poem and poetry may not answer or resolve our questions, but the poet and a poem can move us, can enliven us, can deepen us. And in that, I'll go so far as to say, can save us. So Jesus as an epiphany of darkness, Jesus as poet and poem. This way of thinking for some of us may energize us much more than the creeds, which have more to do with beliefs and presuppositions than they do with wrestling with our depth experiences and wonderment. And again, with this in mind, the inarticulateness of faith and meaning, we might now consider to have a value. February. I titled this session, "In This Desert of Language We Find Ourselves In." That's a phrase of R.S. Thomas's, poet R.S. Thomas. In this desert of language we find ourselves in. The poem goes on, and it's worth, if you Google just that phrase, you'll get the rest of the poem. And then I matched that, I paired that with a phrase of Virginia Woolf's, where she talks about a match struck in darkness. So I paired those two together. In this desert of language we find ourselves in, a match struck in darkness. That even in the midst of sometimes flattened language and in the midst of our darkness and non-knowing, we have illuminations, we have what even Virginia Woolf would call daily miracles. We have these matches struck in darkness that illumine our way and that open our senses and our sense of world. In February, I also, I read two other, I think, important things for you. One was the sermon that Marianne Budde, Episcopal priest and Bishop of Washington, D.C., Episcopal Bishop at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., Marianne Budde gave a sermon on January 21st, 2025. This was right after the inauguration of Donald J. Trump. And she gave a sermon at the National Cathedral. And if you Google it, you can read it or hear it in its entirety. January 21st, 2025, Marianne Budde, B-U-D-D-E. It's a beautiful, wise, measured, powerful statement and reflection. And I read a good part of Marianne's sermon. And then that was in our February session. And then I also read to you the poem, The New Colossus by Emma Lazarus, which is about our Statue of Liberty, who is the mother of exiles. And suggested that these two expressions are really important ways of languaging our concerns, our visions, our hopes. And they have, I think, galvanizing power as well as imaginative power. And that the language in both of these, in Marianne Budde's sermon and in Lazarus's poem, they seek to establish a kind of connection, a connection of deep to deep. And they both encourage us to never stop desiring, and that we can imagine the world differently. So in February, in this desert of language we find ourselves in, and yet there is a match struck in darkness that brings us illumination and grace and power and beauty. So part of our conversation in February was for us to continue to know that we can reimagine the world differently, and that, and I did not read this poem, but I'm going to read it to you today, that we can remake the world with words. We can remake the world with words. And this is a poem by Gregory Orr. Let's remake the world with words, he writes, not frivolously, nor to hide from what we fear, but with a purpose. Let's, as Wordsworth said, remove, quote, the dust of custom, end quote, so things shine again, each object arrayed in its robe of original light. And then we'll see the world as if for the first time, as once we gazed at the beloved who was gazing at us. Okay, I'll read it again. Let's remake the world with words, not frivolously, nor to hide from what we fear, but with a purpose. Let's, as Wordsworth said, remove the dust of custom, so things shine again, each object arrayed in its robe of original light. And then we'll see the world as if for the first time, as once we gazed at the beloved who was gazing at us. In March, we had another guest, Robin Myers. Robin is wonderful. UCC pastor, retired pastor from Mayflower Community Church in Oklahoma. He's also a professor. It was just lovely to have him. Marcus read everything of Robin Myers and thought very highly of him. He thinks the same, incidentally, of Brandon Scott. He loved Brandon Scott as well. And the title for this session, the title was given by Robin, Excuse Me, Interrupting on Behalf of Justice. Excuse me? Interrupting on behalf of justice. And Robin did this wonderful thing of, rather than saying, excuse me, it's like hearing something and say, excuse me? Interrupting on behalf of justice. And this was in March. If you missed that session, I highly encourage you to go and watch it. Second Saturday in March, 2025, Robin Myers. It's again, another important session, an important guest. And he brings a freshness and an accessibility in the way he speaks. And he talked about theology as being a theology of consequence. More than a theology of judgment, a theology of consequence. And he talked about cosmology, not from the heights, but that it's time for us to really develop a cosmology from the depths. So, I'd put that in the deductive, inductive reasoning comparisons. I'd put that in the comparison between theology and theopoetics. He said to us that knowledge is not enough. Reason won't save us. That those two things in and of themselves are not redemptive. But he affirms that love is. Love is. And he affirmed that awe and wonder, that those are the real roots of religion, not doctrine and dogma. And he too emphasized that trust is so much more important than certainty. So please watch Robin Myers, Excuse Me, Interrupting on Behalf of Justice. In April, we had another guest, Mark Oakley, who is an Anglican priest and a dean of a cathedral in the UK, in London. The title of his session was Children of the Snow, Reclaiming a Poetic Faith. Now that title is almost as obscure as mine is, but Children of the Snow, that's a phrase taken by a poem of Wallace Stevens. And in that poem, Wallace Stevens talks about how radically different a landscape can look after a snowfall. How what you thought was familiar no longer looks familiar. How some things are obscured and some things are seen in an entirely different light. So how transforming a snowfall can be to a landscape, and how children take such delight in that. Okay. So the title of his section was Children of the Snow, that we should reclaim a poetic faith, that a poetic faith might have the same effect on us as snow on a landscape. Okay. And that we should delight in it and abandon ourselves to it the way children do in the snow. Okay. I'm going to just quote a couple of things that he said during his talk. Mark Oakley is wonderful. He does not consider himself a poet, but he has a poetical way of seeing, thinking, speaking. He would say he's not a theopoet, a theologian that's a theopoet, but his whole way of thinking is theopoetic. Okay, so how he talks and what he talks about is very illustrative of the kind of move that we are exploring in our exploration of Christianity in and most directly now for the 21st century. Okay, a couple phrases from Mark Oakley. Poetry is the person of faith's natural language. Poetry is the person of faith's natural language, and he unpacked that quite a bit. He talked about the centrality of human imagination for the sake of sacred discovery. Okay. He said, God is never the object of our knowledge, but the generous cause of our wonder. He underscored that language matters because language is sacramental. He said that words are more than what they mean, and suggested that our response to words is the meaning to the words. Okay? Words are more than what they mean, and our response to the words is their meaning. Interesting for us to think about. He said that our gift is our being, and our response to this gift is our becoming. Another phrase of his, the story we live in is the story we live. And that's why it's also really important as we think about what is Christianity? What is the story of Christianity? There isn't just one Christianity. And that story has evolved and has been constructed and reconstructed and deconstructed over time. So the story that we live in is the story that we live. And he also said that story is the only way to talk about God. He also said this, and this is related to what Jack Caputo was saying. God is, listen to this, God is in the world as poetry is in the poem. There's another koan. God is in the world as poetry is in the poem. Language, he says, must move us. Language cannot be stagnant. Okay? Language that tends to want to go for closure, I mean, there's a place for that. Okay? But language that can transform us needs to be language that moves us. It is language that is not stagnant. It's even language that listens. Mark Oakley also says that life and love come from the same source. He has this wonderful phrase that you can have meaning without the final error of defining it. There can be meaning without the final error of defining it. And he said that language, poetic language, okay, which he says is the language, the natural language of our faith, as language is meant to deepen, not resolve. Okay. One little added note that he said that I want to share with you in case you missed it. I think this is a very interesting question. He said this is a question of spiritual direction, but I think this is a very interesting question for us to ask ourselves. Mark says, who do people become in your presence? Who do people become in your presence? I found that very interesting. So Mark Oakley was with us in April. Again, if you missed it, I highly encourage you to watch that session with Mark Oakley. It was so important. I'm just about done and want to turn this time over to you. In May, I titled that session, Suffused with Brilliance from Inside. Now that's a phrase from a Rilke poem, The Ancient Torso of Apollo, which I had read the previous session. I think I reread it to you in May. Suffused with brilliance from inside. It talks about this ancient statue that has been ruined by time. It's incomplete. It's been broken, and yet there is still this beauty that moves us that we can see in this ancient torso of Apollo, because somehow we sense this brilliance from inside, even that work of art that moves us. So in May, we talked about that even in times of destruction and in times where things are incomplete, that still there is a brilliance that life, that love, that the world is suffused with a brilliance from inside. And that sense, that is what Thomas Merton calls a peculiar intuition, that the world is suffused with brilliance from inside. And he, at the corner of 4th and Walnut, saw that brilliance from inside radiating from everybody he saw at the corner of 4th and Walnut, which was the corner of a shopping center. He had that peculiar intuition and he saw it. He also has a depth of intuition, as does Mark Oakley, that the world and our life is a gift. And that our task is to live in commensurate with that gift. Let me just say that our concept of God has radically changed in our lifetime. In the move to post-modernity, we have moved from the God of supernatural theism to a God of awe and wonder that is beyond what we can fully articulate, beyond the full comprehension of our sense of meaning, and that God is in the world like poetry is in the poem. And I suggest that the moves that we are making socially, culturally, religiously, and certainly together on Second Saturday is a move from the theologic to the theopoetic. And that as we move through this glass darkly, that yet in our non-knowing, in our questioning, in our uncertainty, we will find that we are discovering more splendid windows, more numerous doors than we have been able to experience in our efforts to claim a kind of certainty that is really beyond our reach. So I'm sorry I went on longer than I expected today. I would love to hear from you. I would love to know what your takeaways might be from this year, what puzzles you, what caught your fancy, your imagination, what has encouraged your hopefulness. what has affirmed some of your own senses about things, how you see this challenging time that we are in, moving through non-knowing, and dealing with the sense of the possible, which could be good or bad, but dealing with the sense of omnipotentiality, with possibility, and what that might mean for our continuing conversations, and for what that might mean for what Christianity has to offer in this 21st century. So, Jeff, would you help us in the plenary time? Are you there?
Yeah, it took a while for me to be able to unmute, but we're good. Yeah, thanks, Marianne. So much to think about.
Mm.
As you were talking, I thought of a line from a poem by Billy Collins. Poem. It's called How to Read a Poem.
Yes.
The line is, water ski across the surface of a poem and wave at the author on the shore. Yeah. And I was also thinking, I was thinking about the
Well, we're
change.
actually not water skiing. We're kind of diving into the deep
We're
end
kind of diving
and
into
hoping that we're not going down for the count.
Yeah, yeah. And just, the whole idea of awe and wonder as opposed to certainty, that just really struck me, because so much of my experience of Christianity growing up and as a young adult was all about finding certainty and that desire to find certainty.
Right.
And that has been so turned on its head for me. And every day now is about finding awe and wonder, which is definitely superior for doors, more numerous of windows.
Right.
So,
And I think that, Jeff, that certainty was a measure of our faith,
right,
considered a measure of our faith, right?
exactly.
So we worked really hard to show the measure of our faith.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's what made us a good Christian.
Yeah, that was certainly part of it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm suggesting that we go home another way.
Yeah. And ironically enough, I feel like I'm a better Christian now that I'm not a certain Christian.
Yeah. And I like what so many people this year, I mean, Brandon and Robin and Mark underscored the importance of trust, which existentially is very different than certainty.
Yes.
Importance of trust.
Yes.
I'm curious to know how the rest of us are doing out there. And, some of you, I mean, as I looked over some notes from this year, it's like, I don't remember that we did that or that we talked about that. You may not have either.
Yeah.
But I wanted to just sort of pull out some of the things that we actually covered this year and put them in the mix and see how we see it now. So
That was great. That was great. Really.
Well,
did.
yeah. And
So,
let me also just quickly say, and then we'll go to plenary, that, I'm not going to repeat why I chose the music I did this year. I was going to do that, but we don't really have time. But the last piece of music before we start the 9:30 session is Comedians Gallop.
yeah.
And I thought, for all of our seriousness and deep to deep and all of this kind of stuff, it's like I don't want to I also want us to know how to do the Comedians Gallop. I want us to be to dance with a little bit of lightness as well. So
The circus found the park.
the circus found yeah.
So I see that there's lots of hands up. There's
Good.
a lot of
Good.
people who would love to share, Marianne. Just a quick reminder, I'll call on people who's raised their hand icon, and we'll try to keep our comments to 2 minutes. I'll just put up a finger to let you know when that 2 minutes is up so that you can wrap up. So let's begin with Jel. Jel, welcome. It's good to see you.
Whoops. Oh, Jill, I hope we didn't lose you. Eleanor.
What is that? We just got somebody else's meeting.
Yeah, wow. I clicked on
There we
There
go.
you go.
okay.
There you are,
I
Joe.
we go.
clicked on an icon and all of a sudden this popped up.
There you are.
Okay,
I'm
when you
glad.
were
Thank you for wading through all of that, Joe.
Yeah.
Talk to
When you were talking about February and you mentioned desert of language, and what popped into my head is we're talking about theopoetics. So we also have a dessert of language. Add an S and you've got another word, but the richness of language, language is both sparse and also rich. So it just popped in my head and I thought I'd make a comment on that.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. And I would like to think that theopoetics is the dessert of language.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jill. That's lovely.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Shell. I'll just also say real quickly, if you look at your own little rectangle on the screen and you put your cursor over it, you'll see a little box in the upper right-hand corner with 3 dots. And if you click on that, you will see an option to rename. So if you could make sure that the name on your video is the name you would like to be called when I call on you, that would be helpful. So Francis, would you go next?
This is not a question, but Mary Ann, I have to say how very grateful and meaningful this meeting was. I live in Minnesota, and as I started this session, we had just gotten, anyway, I had just gotten the word that our Speaker of the House and her husband was shot and killed. And then another Democratic, I don't know if he was House, probably House, not Senate. He and his wife were shot, but they had just gotten out of surgery. Yeah, right. And I noticed that someone said she had to leave early because she was going to the No Kings March. Our
Good.
No Kings has been called off because this when we started the session or conversation, the suspect was still at large. So
In Minnesota, right
yeah.
where you are.
right, yeah.
Oh,
So
Fran.
anyway, just going through everything, the whole however months we were due, and then picking out certain phrases is just so meaningful.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, I thank you so much for that news break. Needless to say, I have not, thank you for that. We will all be checking that after the fact. I hope that with all that's going on, and there it's a lot of terror and horror, that what I'm talking about also, that it just doesn't sound like it's way up there at 30,000 feet, that there's something about the way that we language our hopes and dreams, and that we live our language, that we enflesh our hope and expectation, that, as I said, we don't give up, that we never let go of our desire, that will encourage us to not lose heart in these days. It's really important. And I just hope that our conversations just don't feel elitist and high and lifted up, and poetry is, it's like, no. This is the kind of stuff that can change the world. So, but oh my gosh, I am, Francis, I'm glad you told us, and stay safe. It's horrific.
But I think we Minnesotans, will not think all of this is up in the cloud someplace, that we will do the best we can to get through it all.
Yes, absolutely. And as you know, my dear beloved husband was a Minnesotan.
Yes.
So, yeah, I know of what you're made. I know of what you're made. So thank you, Francis. And thank you for being part of this conversation, and carry on the conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, carry on. Be of good heart. And we mustn't lack a failure of nerve.
Yeah.
And have a failure of nerve.
Ken Sandine, do you want to unmute?
Yes, thank you. When you were, yeah, I'm still
Uh.
recovering from this recent news here.
You.
Um,
Good
when you
morning,
were
Ken
talking about,
Point of personal privilege here, Ken Sandine is actually a friend. Good friend.
thank you, Marianne. When you talked about inductive and deductive reasoning, something came to mind, and I looked it up and I found it. This was a quote made by a fellow by the name of Fred Craddock, who
Oh,
was a
yes.
professor of preaching at Emory University, and he was down at Sun River. I live in Bend, Oregon, and for those of you not acquainted with the area, there's a community called Sun River, which is sort of a destination resort, and we have an Episcopal church there. And Fred came to that church and made a presentation, and I copied down something that I thought was quite applicable to what you were saying about deductive and inductive. And here's what Fred said.
Good.
That everyone lives inductively, not deductively. For example, no farmer deals with the problems of calfhood, only with the calf. The woman in the kitchen is not occupied with the culinary arts in general, but with a particular roast or cake. The wood craftsman is hardly able to discuss intelligently the topic of chairness,
Yes.
but he is the master with a chair.
Yeah.
We will speak of the sun setting and rising long after everyone knows better. Now, this to me was the clincher. The minister says all men are mortal and meets drowsy agreement. He then announces that Mr. Brown's son is dying and the church becomes the church.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Ken. Fred Craddock was a great, great preacher, and he has authored a number of books, and it's great that you remembered Fred. And what a great, why don't you just read that clincher again for us?
You're muted, Ken.
The clincher was, minister says all men are mortal and meets drowsy agreement. He then announces that Mr. Brown's son is dying and the church becomes the church.
Yeah. Thanks, Ken. Steve Braun. Steve.
Good morning. I hope.
Steve,
Good morning.
the master of haiku.
I was going to tell you, when I was 19 or 20, I was trying to unlearn all of what I had learned and start over with the tabula rasa. So I came up with this little mantra: words are stones, thoughts are flowers. Well, I kind of went into a period of not speaking as much and being like erasing the board and starting over. But poetry has been the way back to embracing language. And this year, with you using poetry as the matrix that you share all the speakers and all the thoughts of the whole year-long project, it's been fantastic. I've shared that when I walk in the woods and I come home, something that happened while I was walking, the experience, I can get it into a little short haiku form, where my memory is such that that's about all I've got to longer would not work. So I'm thankful for all of this. I wanted to thank you. The other point I wanted to make was that I'm planning to do a talk where I talk about primal religions, perspectives about the spoken word and storytelling as opposed to the written word, their perception of time and their sense of deep sense of place, that I got out of a chapter in the Houston Smith's book on world religions.
Right.
I'm going to use Sally McPeg as the hinge,
Great.
who Marcus had a footnote crediting her in the God We Never Knew book I just taught. And then end with saying the language that Sally might be pointing us to now could be quantum physics and some of the language of science and new ways of seeing. There's somebody decided that they would look at the broader electromagnetic spectrum than our eyes can see, and they found out that flying squirrels are pink. And so the point of this ramble is that we now have tools to see things broader than our human apparatus is capable. It might make us rethink our boundedness and come
Right.
up with some broader concepts
Right.
to live into.
Right.
So it'll be
I-
fun. I'm gonna do that on the 29th, and we've already talked about that, Mary Ann. I'll send you a link.
Please do, please
afterwards.
do. Yeah, please do. And I'm going to do something that probably is ill-advised. I want to make sure you have my email, my personal email. It's an Apple address, okay?
Okay.
I hope I don't regret
I'll
putting
see-
that out there in the
No,
universe. but-
I will attempt to hold that in memory till we get off of this and I can get it into Outlook.
Yeah, that would be just super. And
If I reply to the thing that's invited me to this meeting, maybe Jeff or whoever monitors that can send you that, and we'll have my email too, so. we'll
Okay.
Make sure we got it.
super.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and thank you. And Steve, I think you're absolutely right about quantum mechanics and quantum physics, because what they are discovering cannot be explained. It can maybe be described, sort of, but not explained. And so I really appreciate that. And we're able to see things that we couldn't before. So I think that quantum physics is going to be a great boon to our imagination.
It's almost to science as poetry is to prose.
Yes, yes, yes. I love it. It's a quotable quote. Put a copyright on that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you. Thank you.
Steve, you can put your email in the chat, and I saved that chat for Mary Ann. So
Oh, good. Oh, that would have been a better way to do it. I might have to ask Elisa to erase this particular part of our conversation. And Steve, thank you for your, always your thoughtful contributions to our conversation.
Mary, do you want to unmute?
Good morning. Thank you, Mary Ann, for your monthly discussions. They have really inspired me to think new. And I guess my question is, now that we're talking about the changes of language and letting go of the images we've held of God for so many years and so forth, is there a place anymore for corporate worship with this new language? And if so, how do we find it? How do we create it? How do we meet other people who are looking for the same thing?
Yep. I would say that yes. There is, this language should be incorporated in corporate worship. Absolutely. And I think, it's a really important topic, and I might just, Jeff, help me, I might flag that as something to explore next year. I come from a church where they say, where Queen Elizabeth II said, I don't care what you believe, just use this book. So it's like
too.
the Book of Common Prayer, just
Me
use
too.
this book. And I think that there are ways that we can start recognizing the nature and limitations of the kind of language we use, even in the Book of Common Prayer.
Mhm.
We tend to literalize our liturgy, which is a mistake. Liturgy at its best is really poetic and imaginative and symbolic, but we have tended to literalize the language of our liturgy. So I think in some ways we need to re-educate ourselves about all of that, and little by little introduce other ways of talking, imagining, and even praying. I mean, I dare say prayer is not transactional. It's about something else. What is it about? I don't think it's, oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes Benz? And I mean, if you get one, hallelujah, right? But I don't think that's the nature of prayer. So I think in some ways we're at a threshold time of, and here I'll be optimistic, of possibilities. Because I think that the churches, I think that we're, the oxygen is running out of the room in churches.
Absolutely.
And so, yes, I think this is the language of our faith. I think this is the language of liturgy and ritual. I think this is the language of hope and promise. So I think theopoetics is a way for us to try to reconstruct what has been deconstructed. So, but I'm sorry to say I cannot point you to a place in particular.
Maybe we need to develop one.
Well, let's make a note of that. And there are others who might be in churches that are doing, or gatherings of worship, community experiences that are
Right.
more attuned with what you're describing. And if so, then please let us here on Second Saturday know about that.
Okay, thank you.
It's a great question, and let's pursue it.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, Mary,
Thank you,
Yeah.
Mary.
let's pursue that question.
Lynn, do you want to unmute? Good morning.
Good morning. Oh, there's so much to respond to this morning. I got that news from Minnesota, and my first thought was, we have no control over death, but we can control how we live. And I'm not going to the thing today, not because I'm afraid of violence. That hadn't occurred to me actually, but because my arthritis is such that it's not comfortable to walk across the room, let alone several blocks downtown.
Yeah,
But I'm there in spirit.
absolutely. And that counts, Lynn. That counts.
It does. It does.
Certainly.
And my prayer, which is centering prayer, is without words. There are no words.
Right.
Any word
That-
comes.
That also counts. So as Robin Meyer said, he kind of believes in the butterfly effect. You have no idea what the temperament and openness of your heart right now where
Yes.
you
Oh,
are
yes.
might have
Oh,
on
It does.
what's happening elsewhere. So
Yeah. And as far as corporate church has never been, I grew up without it. I grew up with no religious education, which left me with a lot of curiosity. Consequently, I have been studying nothing but ever since. And that's been a long time.
Yeah.
But
and I too was not raised in the church, so I had less unlearning to do. So
oh, yeah, it was
So
nice
do you want
because
to
my
make
friends
a
are.
comment? I know we've got a number of hands and time is running short.
Yes.
Make a final comment before.
Yes. Well, two real quick ones. One is that I'm now hosting three fairly small Zoom groups of friends who are also centering prayer people.
Great.
And we discuss. And this has become church for me. These people are my family now.
Perfect.
And the other was that I started out my spiritual life sitting on the ditch bank, probably age 4 or 5, when my dad was setting water. He was a farmer, and just immersed in the sounds, the smells, the feel of the sun, watching the little beetles scurry ahead of the water down the ditch. And that has been my foundation ever since, even in and through all the various places I've gone since then. But
As Mary Oliver says, I may not know how to pray, but I know how to pay attention
yeah,
this
that's really what it
grasshopper.
is.
to this grasshopper. And
Yeah.
it sounds like you have that same practice and sensibility. So
Yeah. And thank you for what you do. I really appreciate this program.
you're
Thank you.
welcome. Thank you for being part of it.
Mary Ann Mead.
Oh, good.
Nice to see you, Mary Ann.
Nice to see you both as well. This year I have found very challenging because poetry just passes me by,
Oh.
whether it's in English or in French. But I find it really, really difficult to understand. But, do you need to understand it? I don't know. But I was very interested with what Ken Sandine was saying in terms of induction and deduction, and what you were saying, Jeff, as well, in the beginning of the discussion, because it seems to me that I used to be a researcher and I used to do hypothetical deductive research. So I would have a hypothesis and I would then test that hypothesis. But I don't think religion has ever been really hypothetical deductive. I think it's been a systematization of an inductive approach. You know, when religion started, I mean, when humanity started, religion started as well. And it seems that, and I don't want to offend anybody, but actually, if you look at the MAGA religion, this is very much inductive. People who have got a certainty which has never been tested. And now that it's beginning to be tested, it is being found wanting. And I think when you look at people like Robert Kennedy, I mean, he is the antithesis of research. I mean, he's dangerous, but people will believe what he says, even though he has no hypothetical deductive approach to what he's saying. So I think induction can actually be quite dangerous. Although induction is also fascinating in terms of, you know, anthropology and psychology, for example, sociology, because you collect the data and then you try to make sense of it. Religion hasn't, in my mind, not really always done that.
Yeah. Marianne, I think that is so wise and so insightful. And you know, I so appreciate when you contribute to kind of, you know, correct or help critique a thought, or, you know, maybe for me, some of my half-baked thoughts. I think I think it's important that all of us kind of rethink deductive inductive, because I've sort of made some, you know, broad comments about it. I also think you're right that religion is has tended to be a systemization of something that is inductive. I agree completely with that. And in that,
by power, you know, there was benefit.
By power. And that's the kicker.
Yes.
That's the kicker. And so where I think that a lot of our apprehensions are in that regard inductive, but then in the wrong hands, the systemization of, you know, or the assumptions of what this means, or the interpretations of something that we sense, that's the key and the kicker. As Jack Caputo says, it's interpretation all the way down. So how we interpret what we apprehend is absolutely critical. And in the wrong hands, interpretation can be deadly.
I mean, where is the vested interest in that interpretation? That's what we're seeing now.
Absolutely. And that's what Christian nationalism is too.
Exactly.
It is it's vested interests using Christian nationalism to legitimate agendas that, in my opinion, have absolutely nothing to do with the heart of Christianity, or with Jesus for that matter, or with humane humanity for that matter.
Absolutely.
So, you know, and if you haven't seen the session with Mark Oakley, which was in April.
I'm sure I did, but I can look at it again.
Look it up. It's worth your time. Because
I think I saw most of them.
Actually, yeah. But Mark Oakley, because he too will say, no, poetry's not easy. And it's not to be. And but he might invite you to
There's a French author called La Boétie, I think, who says what is understood clearly is expressed clearly, and words to explain it come easily. And my father used to tell me that when I was a kid at school. I know what I mean. Oh, ce qui se consomme, you know, and he would say it in French. And to me, poetry is the antithesis of, you know, ce qui se consomme.
Clarity, exactly. My beloved husband used to say to me, if you can't express what you're trying to say, you don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly. That's him. Thank you. Thank you. And good luck to all of you. today, and yeah,
Mary
I
Ann,
mean,
thank you.
my heart goes to all of you, really.
Thank you, Mary Ann. We need help.
Thank you.
Yeah, we need
The whole
help.
world needs help now.
Yes. And thank you so much for being part of these conversations.
Thank you.
I look to you. So I hope to see you next year as well.
I will. A bit less poetry and
I'll make a note of that. Watch Mark Oakley.
Thank you.
If he'll convert you just a smidge.
No, well, we still can't, but yeah,
Yeah.
no my
Great.
limitations.
Yeah. Thank you, Mary Ann.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well, Mary Ann, I think we're close. We have a couple more people, but hopefully they can stay on with us for coffee.
Yes. Can folks stay on? I see Yolanda and Orly. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do a little bit more of them. Yeah,
Sure.
let me, oh my, I think it's incredibly poignant that this horrible thing that happened in Minnesota happened during our time. Anyway, oh my goodness. Okay, brief close. And then in our closing music is only about 2.5 minutes, so I'll see you all shortly for those who can stay. Our next second Saturday will be September 13th. Okay, so we'll start a new program year. I'll come up with a new title, and we'll continue our conversation about Christianity in and for the 21st century. And as I said in my opening, we do that at a slant. I'll be sending quotes, the quotes that I offered in the beginning. They're all from Mark's book, last book, Convictions. You'll be getting those in about another week or 10 days. The closing music for today is from Les Mis. Since the musical Les Miserables has been in the news this week, and I decided that I would choose our closing music from Les Mis, and it is from the sort of signature piece of Les Mis, which is, "Do you hear the people sing?" And let me just read those first opening words for you. Do you hear the people sing, singing a song of angry men? It's the music of a people who will not be slaves again. When the beating of your heart echoes the beating of the drums, there is a life about to start when tomorrow comes. Will you join in our crusade? Who will be strong and stand with me? Beyond the barricade, is there a world you long to see? Thank you for being part of this year, for your presence, for your participation, for making Second Saturdays possible. And let me leave you with a poem by Wendell Berry that in the midst of these difficult times, let us also let nature be a tender balm, a salve to our troubled souls. From Wendell Berry. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night as the least sound, at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests, in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. When despair for the world grows in me and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water And I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. I look forward to seeing you in September. And in the meantime, deep peace of the Son of Peace to you. Thank you for being part of Second Saturday.